Hello, everybody, and welcome back to CyberTalk. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with our CIO from CasePoint in the last episode. And for this episode, we are bringing another technology leader, a CIO, a man, as I like to put it, running a small kingdom because he's the CIO for the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, aka UMBC, aka my alma mater. So go Retrievers. Jack Suess from UMBC. It is so fun to have you on the show today. Thank you, Jack.
Mike, I've been looking forward to this. I can't wait to have this discussion with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So as I mentioned, I graduated from UMBC in 1995. Jack is also a fellow Retriever, and he has been there for the majority of his career. And we're going to talk about certainly a lot of things from a CIO perspective that many of our listening audience and viewing audience will find as common ground. And then I'm sure Jack's going to get into a couple of things that really are truly unique about higher education and managing such a large, distributed group of endpoints and network and infrastructure. So, Jack, just for a minute, other than the fact that we have the best chess team in the United States, and we beat one of the Ivy League schools in a debate club this year, and yes, we are the Cinderella school that beat Virginia in the first round of the NCAA playoffs a couple of years ago. Apart from that, what should our audience know about UMBC?
Well, for this particular podcast, we also were I think it was 2017 cyber security champions in college. The federal government puts on, there's about 400 schools that participate, and UMBC ended up winning the cyber challenge. Every year, we are usually either ranked 1 or 2 in the Mid-Atlantic. It tends to be us and UVA, our nemesis, who go back and forth. Sometimes we win the regular season. Sometimes they win the playoffs, or they have a championship round that sort of takes you and seeds you into the national competition. But it's a great group of students, and it's one of the reasons that I love being at a university, because we're able to sort of take advantage of some of those great students as we think about how we do cybersecurity here at UMBC.
Yeah, Jack, that's a great point, because there are colleges that have specific expertise or specialties. There are some schools that are known for their arts. There are some schools that are known for design. There are some schools that are pre-law. There are some schools that are medical. And that's a necessity. Because UMBC is a tech expert, tech-focused, I'm sure that influences the dynamics of how you run the technology team for UMBC, right?
Oh, most definitely. And, what really, how it influences it is, so my staff of 80 full-time professionals, approximately 60 are alums of UMBC. That's first off. Second part is the reason I can get away with running a university this size with only 80 full-time staff is because we usually have between 80 and 100 students working for us during the semester. And, it's not like students are just sort of answering the phones or doing other things. We have 6 or 7 students in our information security group. We have 6 or 7 students in our networks group. We have students in our application development group. We have students, of course, doing our help desk and our desktop support. And so this culture of integrating students into the services that we provide, one, I think really keeps us both on our toes, but also keeps us thinking about the services that we need to be providing to our students, because our students are telling us who work for us if our services suck. And so, we can then be sort of integrating some of their viewpoints and asking them, well, how would you fix it? What would you do? What could improve this? And so this sort of culture of being connected to our customers but also then using our customers to be providing broader service back to the community is what I think makes universities just such a special place. I mean, I love coming to a university. I think it is probably the best place to work. And so if you're a professional out there, when you see jobs open at universities, jump on them. They're great jobs.
Yeah, Jack, I want to develop that conversation just a little bit more because you brought up something that I hear a lot. I'm very active in the community. I'm helping to put together a cyber conference with Howard County Chamber of Commerce this summer. And one of the feedbacks that we get a lot is there's not enough talent. And I push back hard on that. I say, no, you are afraid to hire quote unquote unproven talent. And I think what you just touched on is that many of the students that come out of the UMBC program have been a little battle tested because they've gotten to be involved with your IT team. So if you were talking to CIOs today, what recommendations would you make around that as far as getting the right talent in place to grow their team appropriately?
So, what I say to everyone as we're trying to do this is that your talent management strategy has got to be multifaceted. And what I mean by that, and I'm going to use a sports analogy, but the sports analogy that I'm going to use is baseball. So, yeah, you've got your full-time staff. That might be your major league team. But you aren't going to operate if you don't have people at AAA, AA, single A. You've got to be having this ladder that is going to be, and not everyone that starts at single A or AA is going to make it to the major leagues. But they can be adding value because they're also part of their helping to train the people that do make it in. And so what I have sort of developed, and frankly, this strategy sort of came about because I got my first sort of professional experience working as a student at UMBC. 1979, I was a math major at that time. Computer science was one of the tracks in mathematics, and I was doing the applied math track, and one of my advisors said, well, you ought to take some computer courses. It's good for, if you're going to do applied math, to know how to use the computer. So I started taking some of the computer science track, and there were only 6 courses at that time. And so I ended up also doing the computer science track. But as I did that, I ended up getting an opportunity to work between my junior and senior year at UMBC full time. And one, it was great because before that I was working in retail. And so now I got to actually do a job and I was doing programming. But the second part is that this idea of students and not knowing everything, to your point, when you're 19, 20, 21, you're a sponge. If something interests you, you're just going to go and figure it out. And you're going to spend the time that it takes to learn. And I think for employers, one of the most critical skills that is going to determine whether somebody goes from single A to AA or AA to AAA or AAA to the major leagues is how much they can learn on their own. How quickly can they figure out what they don't know? Are they capable and smart enough to ask questions of people who might know? How are they at integrating into your team? All of these elements you pick up if you are using interns. And so the idea that these companies are afraid to bring in interns, and I get it that for many of the companies, it's a real challenge if you're in the DoD top secret space because you might have to get a secret clearance or something like that. But what I can tell you is your competitor, NSA, is hiring a lot of our students as sophomores and juniors, getting them clearances and then bringing them in. And so UMBC, one of the things we're proud of is we're the university that has the largest base of people that are working at Fort Meade. And that sort of shows you that many of our students, their parents or friends of their parents work at Fort Meade. They've grown up in this culture. And they're not worried about getting a top secret clearance. They know what they have to be doing in their lives to be able to get a top secret clearance. And so they're comfortable with that sort of model of working in an environment where they have to have a top secret clearance because their parents have or their friends of their parents have. And they've heard what a good place it is to work. And so it's a really interesting environment. But I really encourage people to be thinking about interns as a key element because so many of these times when I lose a person, I just immediately, all right, who's ready to come in and start to be working full time? All right, you're going to graduate in a few months. We'll give you more effort now, and then we'll start a search to be hiring. And usually it's going to be somebody that's on our staff as a student that is starting to come in that we end up hiring, and then we grow them over the time.
Yeah, I want to continue your baseball metaphor. I'm a huge baseball fan. I'm sure you and I have talked about that at one point or another. But the reason that a player often gets promoted from single A to double A, or double A to triple A, or triple A to the majors, is because they've shown that ability to adjust. So you have a power hitting first baseman. Maybe he's not so good with the curveball at first, but see fastball, hit fastball. He does great with that. But over time, he learns, well, I need to lay off that curveball, but this one I can actually put the bat on it and drive it.
Right.
And then when they get to double A, maybe it's getting better at recognizing the changeup. And then when you're at AAA, it's okay, well, now I have to incorporate all of these. And then when you're at the majors, it's I've got to have a balanced attack. I have to study on my own, because facing Roger Clemens is different from facing Randy Johnson. They're both dangerous pitchers, but if I study, I can learn to be successful against them. And that's one of the tasks that my company has taken is we are looking, sure, we want experience. Yes, we want the right degrees and so forth. But one of the first things we test every prospective employee for at the beginning is problem solving. And I think that's what you're touching on, is when these students are passionate about the industry, that their curiosity helps them become great problem solvers. Am I onto the right thing there?
No, I think that is a key element of figuring out your future growth potential that would be there. And one of the things that was really, an interesting thing for me personally is when I started my career at UMBC, I was also working as what was called then a student consultant. And the idea of a student consultant is when people had programs or things that didn't work, they'd go talk to the student consultant. And, we would try to and so, some days I would have, if a COBOL program was due, I might have COBOL code. Other days I would have Pascal or Fortran code. Some days I'd have Lisp code. Some days I'd have assembly language code. Some days I'd have statistical package code. And people were bringing me all sorts of different problems. Learning how to ask questions. What are you trying to do? How are you trying to do this? Why this? This doesn't seem to make sense here. All of this sort of thing really helped me also learn to be a better programmer and to understand how to be more helpful to people. And so I think learning how to debug programs is an art that often students don't have as much of now, because we're used to the fact that compilations and debugging you just keep running them over and over, iterating constantly. In the past, when I was growing up, you might have to wait 20 or 30 minutes to get a compilation done. And so, you didn't want to have stupid errors and things like that. And so sure. I think that, there is some benefit in learning how to look at code flow and trace what's happening to variables and understand some of those basic functions, which are sort of old school computer science, but I think they're really also very helpful in thinking about doing good things with your code now as well.
Yeah, and I love that. There is an embracing of what's in place, right? And then there's looking forward, because as you've literally grown up in this industry. So what IT is today is radically different from what it was even just 5 years ago. The revolution, you can't even call it evolution anymore. The revolution of infrastructure, software, security. I'm not trying to say that it's easy. Quite the opposite. There's a reason that you have 80 people on your team plus another 80 students. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, on how it's evolved, and strategically. I don't want you to give away secret sauce, but strategically, how are you dealing with those challenges?
So I also want to sort of say that I think one challenge that I see a lot today is that we move too quickly to specialization. And so, one of the interesting things in my career is, so I started out in doing application programming, ended up moving in after a few years. There was an opportunity and a need to have a systems programmer. And so I ended up switching from applications programming to doing systems programming, where I had to do a lot of assembly language type of work, a lot of low-level operating system activities. I then got involved in sort of the start as we were beginning to build out the first stages of networks and doing things with TCP/IP. And then I got involved with cybersecurity, and I got, and I got involved early on in sort of launching some pilots using the World Wide Web back in the late 80s and 1990 timeframe.
Sure.
And so those kinds of things allow you to sort of get a better perspective. And I think all too often we have students who are really great in one area, but they have no sense of anything else. And so one of the things that we're also trying to do is move students through a variety of different opportunities. We say to students, you may have no interest in ever wanting to necessarily do networks, but spending a year learning how to do networks will help you the rest of your career, because if you understand networks, it's going to help you do better in lots of things, especially something like cybersecurity, because cybersecurity and networks are so fundamentally aligned that are there. And so little things like that, I think trying to help people get a broader view can be really helpful through this effort in trying to think forward. And that's one of the areas I try to focus on with our students a lot.
And I'm going to go back to your baseball metaphor again. If you look at modern Major League Baseball, almost every general manager will tell you they love the guy that can step in and play 3 or 4 positions without missing a beat. Now, everybody loves the Cal Ripkens of the world that literally played shortstop almost their entire career. People, of course, they love that. But the players that are getting the looks are the ones that, I can play left and I can play first and I can play third. The more versatility you can bring to your team, the higher value. And I think from a hiring perspective, and this isn't even just for IT, but I think it's very relevant to IT, is that if you can show a broad background, so particularly in technology, but even non-technical. So on the Case Point episode before you, one of the things that their CIO said to me was, I have to effectively communicate the why. Why are we doing this? And you don't necessarily learn how to do that in your engineering and computer classes. So having that diversity, not just within your industry, but having the diversity of your background can be really helpful. And I've always gotten that impression from you. You've never struck me as straight tech. You've got a diversity to you.
So, in sort of 2 pieces in that why, and what I will tell you that is probably the most fulfilling part, and it was true for me as well, and that was, I don't think I would have been in tech if I hadn't gotten a job at UMBC. Frankly, I was a pretty good computer science student, but programming wasn't the thing that I thought I really wanted to go do when I was taking the programming courses. And it was when I started becoming a programmer for the university, it was a completely different type of programming. I was interacting with people. I was trying to understand, well, what are you trying to do? Okay. How do you want it to work? What are you trying to accomplish? And this sort of interactivity with a person to understand what their specifications were, what they needed to have done. That was really a fun activity for me, sort of the analyst side of this. But then that got fulfilled by then going and using programming skills to create something for a person. And I think when I go into classes, I always tell people, no matter what your job is, even if it's the most technical job in the world, you're going to have to be figuring out how you communicate with others. And, I used to teach the Unix systems administration class here for many years. And I'd go in and I'd say, you think you're never going to write. And I said, and the reality is I go in and I look, and this was in the mid 90s. And at that time I said, when I look at my inbox, I've sent 20,000 messages 20,000 email messages the last 2 years. It's like, you're going to send a lot of email to people, and you need to be able to understand how to write, because if you're writing in a way that makes no sense or isn't communicative, people are going to look at you like, what are you doing? You're not, right for the job.
You're a college graduate? Who writes
right,
like
exactly. So learning how to write, learning how to communicate are just critical things for all students, no matter what you are going to end up doing. And it's one of the things that we try to sort of emphasize here is that, yes, you need technical skills and you need to be able to learn on your own, but you also need to have good communication skills and be able to write. And so I do agree with you that learning how this, now some people though, really they thrive on deep technical problems.
Some people see fastball hit fastball, and that carries them to the Hall of Fame.
And other people, they want to come in and every day they want to be surprised at what they're going to do. And the beauty of IT is that we've got jobs for every type of person. And it's just making sure you get slotted into the right type of job that's going to matter.
Yeah, I love that. We at my company, as all the leadership members had to study good to great. And you just brought up the getting the right butts on the on the seats in the bus.
Yeah, I love Jim Collins and all of his books. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic item there. So as a university, you and your team are managing thousands of endpoints. I can't even begin to put a number on how many between cloud environments, both physical as well as virtual, and your edge switches and your routers and your PCs and your laptops and your tablets and your smart devices. Strategically, where do you start protecting all of that?
Well, that's a great question. And so let me sort of also give you like a data point. So normally when we look at our Wi-Fi data, we'll peak out on most given days at, I don't know, somewhere around 18,000 devices at any given time, that's sitting on Wi-Fi. Now, this doesn't count. There's probably another 4,000 that are, somewhere on wired Ethernet or things like that. But, and when you think about it, between phones, laptops, tablets, and, just whatever. So that gives a sense of the volume that would be there. I think one of the interesting things about higher ed, and I can sort of talk about it because I've been a part of UMBC's journey in doing this, is that higher ed initially was late to implementing firewalls. We've always thought of open networks. We want to be able to have, we don't want to be blocking content. It's really about the experience that would be there. And so we were a late comer to beginning to implement firewalls. But what that required us to do in the 90s is to be thinking about, well, how do you do security if you don't have a firewall? And so the way you do security is one, you make sure that you patch. You are up to date on what you need to be doing. Number two, though, is you turn off all services that you're not using. And so when I used to teach the Unix systems administration, the first thing that we would go through is, you look at a standard Unix install and it opens up a gazillion set of services. And what you as a systems administrator really needed to know is, well, what of these gazillion set of services do I really need to have open? Because I am only going to be providing those services. If I'm not providing those services, shut it down, turn it off. That's your best way of being protected, because now you don't have to worry about a vulnerability coming up on a particular thing that, may end up being a challenge for you. So that's one piece, is just sort of understanding how to be having a good maintenance of the things that you are running. And so that culture of really thinking through what we're providing, how we're running things, cuts into everything that we do. And so we're really managing things and making sure that we just don't by default put stuff on. I think the second part that comes into play is understanding what things need to talk to. And then
love it.
the fact that you can have, right from the very beginning, you could have access control lists in your routers or other things that are saying, this device can talk to these devices, but it may not be able to talk to any devices outside of these subnets or these certain networks that are there. And so we started in this process of managing a lot of that very early. And so that culture has sort of stayed with us in trying to think about this. Over the last few years, I would say, for me, we do have firewalls now, obviously, and we have intrusion prevention systems, and we have other things, but we still have a culture that is really designed around sort of defense in depth and understanding what needs to talk to whom, and how do you sit down and think about what are potential risk scenarios. And this is where sometimes talking to our students and talking to others, do certain departments need to be able to talk to other departments directly? Maybe, maybe not. And so, we've designed our networks to be fairly sophisticated in thinking through, how we do access control, who can be seeing what, how we can be managing this. And, the hope with that, along with collecting a lot of data and sort of reviewing that and other sorts of things, is that we're doing a reasonably good job of trying to be handling cybersecurity. I will tell you that cybersecurity is a daunting challenge. The reality is that at any given time, one mistake can make me vulnerable, even though I may be doing the right thing 99.9% of the times. Human error or some other sort of vulnerability that comes out, boom, you're having to sort of jump and deal with it. And so I think that that's one of the elements that, there. I'd say the other piece that we do here, that higher ed does, is that, and I don't see it in the business side, is so we have across higher ed a community of practice. So there's what's called ISACs. I don't know if you've heard the term, Mike, of an ISAC. But
no, I have not. Please tell us.
So it stands for Information Sharing and Analysis Center. And so banking has one, telecommunications has one, sure. Energy has one, healthcare has one, higher ed has one. And so UMBC participates in our ISAC. And any given, I was early, I helped sort of set the higher ed one up in the early 2000s, when most of these ISACs got set up in 2002, 2003. And I got very involved in the higher ed ISAC in 2006 here. And so I've been involved with it for the last 15, 16 years. But on any given day, there'll be 100 messages. But if one university is seeing certain kinds of attacks, they'll share some of that information, and we can then be looking, are we seeing other, and this idea of communicating, sharing threat intelligence, and you can get this through some of the vendors as well, where they'll share threat intelligence information. But I think it's absolutely critical to be looking at these sorts of things, because they're some of your early warning signs that you need to be on top of something that may not be, readily announced. So, going back, I think it was the Log4j, thing that hit.
Yep.
We were seeing, notices of this before it was public, that, okay, this is going to be coming out. We began scanning, other sorts of things, looking at this, getting a little bit of notice ahead of time and through this. And these are some of the kinds of things that I think are really critical if you're going to try to be doing security, is being part of a community where you're sharing information.
Wow. So, okay, we got a lot to unpack there. And I promise we're not going to go super overlong our time today. I heard a couple of just brilliant things. As a university, you can fall under a number of compliance frameworks. You can fall under HIPAA because you have to have medical records for your students. You can fall under PCI because you have a retail center and some students pay with a credit card, on and on. So you can fall under all these compliance frameworks. But I heard two things from you that I really love is that it starts with policies and procedures. It really does. Coming up with a consistent, if this happens, this is what we're going to do. This department can talk to this department, and here's why. These people have access to these systems, and here's why. So getting really clear and really specific on that. Because if there's something that I tend to see missing, is that people don't have policies and procedures in place. Maybe they have good infrastructure. Maybe they have a quality firewall. And then you have this collaborative element where, and frankly, that's what I wanted to do with this show, is I wanted other CIOs and CISOs to be able to learn from each other. I want them to watch this episode and go, hey, that's a good idea. I'm going to start that because that can help my business. That can help me better protect.
No, it's a great, and I'll give you an example where some of that can go into play is what we do at the campus is we identify departments that are working with all the different kinds of data that you highlighted that we would call higher risk data. And so all of those groups that are doing that, if we know what data they're working with, which we do, we can then put the right kinds of security controls around them, and that's fine. We don't necessarily need to have those same security controls around every one of our students because our students aren't working with that kind of data. Most of our faculty aren't working with that kind of data because most of it is administrative data. It's not the kind of data that you would use in teaching classes or doing your own research. And so we can be creating a set of security rules that make it more complicated and maybe more restrictive for those where it needs to be. And we can make it more open and more accessible for those that don't have those same kinds of requirements. And building out an environment to be able to think that way where you're looking at where risk is and then really tightening that is, I think, one of the key elements to what you just highlighted.
Yeah, because a small business owner, say, that has 10, 15 employees, they might listen to this and go, I can't do that. No, but you can take the principles from it and you can apply it because you'll uncover the reason that things like PCI and HIPAA and GDPR exist is because so many organizations just didn't know how to get after it. You could put a really smart person in charge, but if they don't have a plan or they don't have a blueprint to follow, then you have to know where you're going. You have to know your true north, right?
Well, and you have to be thinking about, all right, well, what are the risky elements that we do as a business? And so if taking orders is the risky elements, what you may want to think about is, well, I don't want to be storing credit card data on my clerk's PC or server. I probably want to be thinking about a cloud-based service that is going to be doing my transaction.
That handles most of that responsibility.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Now I've shifted the risk from my organization up to a third party, and I probably are able to do other things in my organization much better because now I don't have to put additional controls or be worried about these sorts of things. And that's another area where now with so many software as a service vendors, you can be shifting your risk appropriately as you're trying to think about what you're doing.
Yeah, so if those vendors can clearly say, our product is PCI compliant, our product is HIPAA compliant, our product is GDPR compliant, depending on what you are doing as a professional, says, oh, well, this makes my life 100% better. I'm working with a client right now, and they help young men and women from around the globe get into colleges and universities here in the United States. So because of that, a significant portion of their customers come from Europe. And they reached out to us and said, well, we need to begin following GDPR. We're not following any specific framework now. So that's where we need to start. And I'm sure you know this. GDPR is pretty comprehensive. It's probably the most intensive one out there for non-government. I'll frame it that way. And then but a lot of it's policies and procedures. Mm-hmm. There's the control requirement, sure, but a lot of it is getting clear on those policies and procedures So I love what you said there, because if you can evaluate your business, whether you have 100 employees or 100,000, and you start to look at them from a departmental standpoint and saying, this segment needs to do this, and then you document it, and then you implement. And then the next segment needs to do this, and you document it, and you implement. That's how you eat this elephant, right?
No, it is, and going one step further, as we get audited regularly by different entities, but one of the things that we built in that me as a CIO wants to know is, are we actually doing what we wrote down and said we were going to do? So,
yes.
So what we've built into there is because that's in a sense what auditors are coming in and doing is you've got policies and procedures. Are you actually following them? And so we built in these, quarterly, semi-annual, and annual different kinds of validations that we go through, and we have a person in our security area who manages compliance, and they're looking at whether or not we've actually done what we said we were going to be doing, and we make sure that we've tidied it all up. And that's just a really critical element for, I think, larger or mid to large size organizations. It's great to have policies, but if people aren't actually following them, now you're really at risk, because not only are you potentially exposing yourself to additional security risk, but if something bad happens from a legal standpoint, you look even worse because you said you were going to do this, you didn't do it. And so it really falls down as management, lack of management oversight, so to speak. And so I think finishing the loop where you're creating a compliance model that checks to be verifying that you're doing the things that you need to do, it forces your team to be developing really good processes and procedures to be able to document that.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a CIO for a private school in Howard County a few years ago, and I won't describe beyond that because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. But one of the things that we discussed with him was doing a network assessment, just vulnerability scan. Here's where you are, here's where you need to be. And he said, let me get this straight. You want me to pay you $20,000 to see how badly I've done at my job? And I was like, wow, this guy's got a lot to hide. And you made a very good point. Sometimes you need that outside perspective to say, Jack, you're doing a great job. We found these things. And maybe someone on your team was going to implement that and something else came up and they didn't get to it. So it's healthy to have an independent partner. And you don't just go and pick somebody. You build relationships over time. I know you've got a database of people that you work with, that you trust, that are not direct UMBC employees, that when it makes sense, you pull the trigger and say, all right, I need you to come in, I need you to look at this for me and give me your honest opinion. And that's how you really get secure, because you can't prevent all the bad things from happening. But to coin a phrase from HIPAA, are you taking reasonable and appropriate action to prevent these things from happening? And it sounds like that's your strategy.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think it at the other piece that I would just add into this mix is making sure that everyone is thinking security. One of my sort of...
Agreed. Love it.
I would say one of the pieces where we held off for a while is actually having a chief information security officer. And I have a great chief information security officer at UMBC. He was director of networks for many years. But what I said to him is, I really want everyone to own security. I want everyone to think that I'm the chief information security officer for my particular area, that I'm taking security into account.
Take ownership.
I do.
Yeah, brilliant.
And really sort of owning that. And I understand what security means in my relative tech type of area that would be here and how to be validating this. Over time, we realized we needed to have just someone who was taking ownership across the organization. And so we did decide to do a CISO. But I do think that it's really critical to be not depending on a single person or one or two people to be saying, well, it's their job to worry about cybersecurity. I can do whatever I want.
It's done. Just trust me.
They're gonna handle it. It's everybody's job that's going to be here, and it's everybody's job in the organization to be recognizing that I just can't click on every link that shows up in my email, because no matter how well you do it, sort of trying to stop phishing email, you're going to get things that go through. You got to ask yourself, does this at all look reasonable and legitimate? And if not, or even at all in doubt, do not click. Simple things like that.
Cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. Jack, I just want to print that on a bumper sticker and slap it on every car that I walk by. Today's conversation has been fantastic. Jack Suess, VP of IT and CIO for University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Thank you so much for joining us today on CyberTalk.
It's my pleasure, Mike.